In today's video, we're going to take a look at this synth, why it's so insanely good, why it's totally unique, and most importantly, why you should absolutely not sleep on it or ignore it. And just wait until you hear what this thing actually sounds like. It's going to blow your mind. Let's get straight into it. So today we are looking at Native Instruments' masterpiece, Razor. Now there's a couple of reasons why it might not be on your hot list. Firstly, it was released in 2011, so it's quite old, and in the world of VSTs, new stuff is coming along all the time, so it does tend to fly under people's radars, particularly as Native Instruments are not exactly hyping it up much nowadays. Secondly, it's an additive synth, and additive synthesis has got the reputation of being really difficult. Hats off to Native Instruments with Razor because they've made it a breeze to use. You'll see what the GUI does and how simple it is when we get into that later. And yeah, finally, it's got an unjustified reputation of being a one-trick pony. It was released at the height of the dubstep bubble, and it did come with a bunch of dubstep presets, but it can do so much more than that. Basses, pads, leads, even drum hits, and they all sound fantastic. But don't just take my word for it. We're going to take a deeper dive into the synth now, take a look at the GUI, create some really great sounds from scratch so you can see how simple that is, and yeah, let's just get into it. First up, we're going to see what Razor sounds like out of the box with a quick preset tour. Then we're going to do a bit of sound design, create some sounds from scratch so you can see just how easy it is to dial sounds in from the bottom up, and then we'll take a run through the gorgeous GUI. So let's kick things off with some of the presets that I think are particularly good. So 10 great examples of what Razor can do, and as you can see, it's a really versatile and capable synth. It's great for creating unique sounds and textures that you simply can't create with other synths like FM or subtractive synths, certainly not a one-trick pony or a dubstep wobble machine. So it sounds pretty good out of the box, as you've already seen, but as always, the real fun starts when you delve a bit deeper and start designing your own sounds, and that's exactly what we're going to get into right now. For this section of the video, we're going to be working at two polar ends of the sonic spectrum. First up, we'll work on creating a beautiful ethereal pad, and then I'll move over to creating a really nasty sub-bass. Not that nasty, a sub-bass with a bit of a growl to it. So we've got the nice and soft, and then the nasty and growly. If you like what you hear, if you'd like to get your hands on these presets or a sample pack of both or either of them, do leave a comment below and I'll do exactly that for you, make them publicly available. But for now, this is the sound that we're going to be working with on the ambient side, and this is just me pressing one key on my keyboard. Very lovely, very ambient, very ethereal. So let's move over to the initial patch so that we can get started from scratch. So here we are in the initial patch, and this is what Razor sounds like. Very basic, as you would imagine. I want to set this to polyphonic because we're going to be creating a pad. We'll have high quality. Let's turn the output up a little bit, but not too much. And looking at the voicing, and what I would say here is the GUI is covered in the next section of this video. And as we're changing parameters, for the most part, if you look here, you will see the value change. So let's just change that randomly there. You can see that. Let's work with the voicing section, and we'll reduce that to -24. For the oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, we're going to work with the primes oscillator. Just click here and you see all of the options that you have. Let's go with primes for both. And that, without getting too technical, because I don't actually fully understand it, but I believe that has got something to do with the partial numbers that are being used. They're only prime numbers. For the filter 1, we're going to work with the formant filter, and then filter 2, we'll work with the phaser. We're not going to have any effects in this slot, and we will have some reverb, because this is a pad, and what is a pad without any reverb? And we won't need any kind of dynamics or shaping because it's just a very soft, simple pad. So we'll leave that just switched off for the time being. And yeah, let's switch oscillator 2 on, then phaser filter on, and this is what we sound like now. So already a bit different without any kind of modulation or anything like that. And what I want to do is actually switch the 3D off because it does get a bit of a drain on the CPU, but that's still a pretty oscillator there. So it's a pad, so we need a long attack. Let's turn that up to about 2 o'clock. Decay also needs to be turned up a bit. Sustain, we can turn that down a bit, and we need a longer release as it is a pad, but we don't want it to go on forever. There we go, already resembling a pad at least a little bit. Let's work with the LFOs now. We're only going to be using one LFO, and that will be LFO 1. And as we cover later in the GUI, click and move up and down to select your waveform. We're just going to work with a nice sine wave there, and we'll keep it at the hertz rather than synced to the host tempo. And let's turn that to about 10 o'clock, something like that. There we go. And we don't want any side chain, and again this is covered in the next part of the video. So now that we've got the LFOs set up, what we need to do is assign them to some different parameters in the oscillator and the filter. So let's work with making the amplitude come in and out a little bit. So you click here on the subdial and then you select the source. So we're working with LFO1. That's quite simple. Then click and drag for the depth of the modulation. And we'll do the same here for oscillator 2. Click and drag. So that should already have, as you would expect, a nice simple flowing sine wave affecting the amplitude of both the oscillators. So for the filter, I think what we can do is make use of one of the envelopes. Let's work with envelope 2. Let's make it a long attack, long release, because we're working with pads here, and yeah, make it quite similar to the amp envelope. So long attack, long decay, and what we're going to do is assign envelope 2 to the formant filter. And we're just going to have a touch of key track, and again let's click and drag just a touch there, like I say, and let's turn the envelope up at least a little bit more than that, and let's just switch that off there, we don't need that on. And for the formant frequency, let's move that down to around about -40, and for the stretch, let's turn that to about 0.25, and the center, we'll turn that to 55-ish, and for the select, that should be around about 15. So let's see what effect that's had. Okay, definitely having an effect there. Let's work on the second filter. Let's move this down to 0.5. There we go. And the amount we can have around about 1920, something like that. And the phase nearly all the way down. So that sounds a little bit dull. Let's work with the reverb. We've actually got the wrong one on there. We got the reverb synced. We just want the basic reverb. Turn the decay up. So we're getting there. What we need to do now is work with modulating the ratios of both the oscillators, and we're going to use this option, which is filter 1 track. Let's assign that there, and we'll turn that up to about 2 o'clock, and we'll do the same for oscillator 2, filter 1 track. Turn that up full. So we're getting close up. Let's set the ratios, reduce them a little bit. We'll go down to about 5.5 for this, for the oscillator 1, and roughly the same for oscillator 2. Now let's work with the amounts on both oscillators. Turn this one down to about 0.18. 9 o'clock on the clock, and the amount for the second oscillator, we'll turn that down or turn it up a little. There we go. So where are we at now? Pretty close. So this is where things get very fine in terms of the adjustments. So this is where we're at now. So it's getting close, but I think what we need to do is brighten it up a little bit. Let's turn the formant filter frequency up a little, increase the depth of the modulation, and increase the envelope 2 a little more. And there we go. Next up, we're going to be working with something a bit heavier, a bit nastier. We've got a sub bass with a bit of a growl attached to it. And yeah, let's get straight into that now. Same drill with this sound. I'll give you a preview of what we're going to be making, and then we'll switch straight to the initial patch, and then we'll get into it. So as I said, it's a bass sound. It's a little bit gnarly. There we go. That's what we're going to create. Somewhat different to the nice pad that we just did, but yeah, let's get straight into it. So we're back with this sound, and we're going to stick with mono because it's a bass, and that's typically what we do with basses. And again, we need to turn this down 2 octaves to -24 because it is a bass. There we go. Both oscillators, similar to the previous sound, we're going to have the same oscillator on oscillator 1 and 2, but we're going to be working with the formant oscillator for both of these. So let's set them both up. Switch oscillator 2 on. Going to have a low pass on filter 1, and this time we're going to be playing with a comb notch on filter 2. So let's switch that on. And again, we're not going to have any effects in this slot. Here we're going to be working with the unisono noise. And if you own Razor and you want to delve deeper into what these do, you should have received a manual, and there's a description on each of these. So obviously reverb, you should know what that is, and a chorus, but something like air, resonant reverb, and this one, not quite as obvious. Refer to the manual and it'll give you a much better description than I can. So we've got a bit of unisono noise, and here on the last slot we're going to add a clipper because we don't want things to get too out of hand. And let's just set that while we're here, turn the drive up a little and the fold over to about 2 o'clock. I'm going to add some safe bass, and this is basically a way of adding some boost to the fundamental frequency that you're working with. Okay, so that's the sound that we've got right now. Let's get straight on over to the oscillators and get them sounding a bit better. So we'll take this down to -40-ish, something like that. There we go. And we'll select at number 11. And let's add a bit of color, just a touch. And on oscillator 2, let's do kind of the opposite. We'll turn this up to around about 20-ish, something like that. And the select, turn that to around about 20. And in terms of amplitude, we'll have this one on full, and we'll just turn this one down a touch so it's at about 3 o'clock. Not sounding very nasty or growly yet, but I'm sure we're going to get there. So let's work on the low pass. We want cut off at about 9 o'clock. Let's have some boost of the frequency. Set the width to around about 27, 28, something like that. And let's just reduce the slope of the EQ curve. And the comb notch, roughly the same kind of frequency. Turn the shape to about -30. And let's have the phase at 12 o'clock there, like that, at 0. There we go, not sounding especially deep or growly yet, but let's get into the modulation. And that's going to change things up pretty quickly. So let's leave the amp envelope as it is. Fast attack, reasonably fast release, because we're working with a bass sound. Don't want them taking too long to kick in. And for this particular sound, we want a slow attack curve for the envelope, and you'll see why that's the case momentarily. Turn the sustain up and release at 2 o'clock. We're not going to need envelope 3, but we will be working with a sine wave LFO set to frequency, and we'll turn that down to about 0.5, maybe a bit slower, 0.3. And let's assign some of these envelopes and LFOs. So we'll leave oscillator 1 as it is. Oscillator 2, we're just going to modulate the formant a touch. There should be enough there. Nothing discernible yet, but we'll definitely get there. Need a bit of modulation on the low pass cutoff frequency, so let's set some envelope and an LFO on there. Turn the envelope up to 3 or 4 o'clock, something like that. And the LFO 1, we'll just add a touch of that. Let's go to 30 on that. And let's play with the boost a little bit. Add a touch of envelope 2. And let's play with the shape of the comb notch. So you can see that envelope already bringing the growl in. Let's play with the comb notch a little. Envelope 2, again, just a touch there. And LFO 2, again, just a touch. So we've got some movement going on there. And we're getting pretty close. I think we just need a bit of fine tuning. There's probably a bit too much going on here, so let's work with that to make it sound good. Perhaps just a touch too much there. And what you'll find when you're working with Razor is often it's the really small tweaks like this that make a big difference. It might not look like a lot between the changes that we've just made, but it will affect the sound quite profoundly. Yeah, that sounds better. I think the culprit here is, oh, we got the wrong LFO set. Okay, let's set the right LFO. Okay, that should make it sound better. I want to make that sound a bit growlier. That is getting pretty close now. I think we add a bit of colour to the second oscillator. And there we go, that's the growl that we're after. So pretty close to the sound that we started with. Nice low end bass with a touch of growl. and you can certainly make it more aggressive by using different types of distortion that are available. There we go. That's nasty. So that's it. That's the sound that we were looking for, or as close as we can get. And just a reminder, this is what we started out with. So again, quite a nice transformation. And as I said at the start of this section of the video, if you do want to get your hands on these presets or some samples of the presets, leave a comment below and I'll get them online for you, and I'll leave a link in the description. But for now, we've done 2 different sounds from scratch, so you've got a good inclination of how to make something reasonably good in Razor outside of the presets that come with it. Often easier to just take a preset and work with that, but we've just gone from scratch here just to give you an idea of what it's capable of. So now you've got an idea of what the presets sound like, how easy it is to work with to create a sound. Let's take a look at the GUI in a bit of a deep dive. Not going to go too deep into it because this is quite a deep synth and that would take way too long. But yeah, let's get into the GUI. Let's take a look at the GUI, and I'm going to say right off the bat that I think Razor is a masterpiece of GUI design and functionality. This synth was released in 2011 and somehow it still looks clean, sharp and futuristic. Hasn't dated, hasn't aged a day. I think Native Instruments set out to make additive synthesis accessible and as simple as possible, and this GUI is a big part of that. It feels like a subtractive synth, certainly not intimidating in any way, and it just has a feeling of familiarity when you start working with it. So just to put things into perspective, this is the GUI for Loom. This is an excellent additive synth in its own right, but I think you can see what I'm saying when you compare them back to back. Loom certainly looks a bit more scientific and not as welcoming as Razor, and that's one of the unique things about this synth. It is complex. Additive synthesis is a complex means of synthesis, but Razor just boils it down into a really easy to use GUI and lets you access the unique sounds that you can create with additive synthesis very easily. Yeah, let's get deeper into it. Take a look at each of the sections so that you can see exactly what does what and have an understanding of how this synth works. Let's start off across the top with the global controls here. You've got the mono poly switch, mono poly. You've got the quality settings here, high, medium and low, and you've got the global output. This is the macro setting. We're not going to dive into that in this video because it's that would make the video far too in-depth and far too long. This is going to be an overview of the GUI and how to kickstart things in terms of making some great sounds. In the middle here we have got the graphic display, and let's just trigger a simple note, and you've got multiple options down the bottom here. This is oscillator 1. That's showing the spectrum of the output of oscillator 1. Same with oscillator 2. And then you've got filter 1, filter 2, the clipper, which we'll come to in just a minute, the stereo output, the global output, and then you can switch to a scope. And here you have the option to actually remove the 3D effect, and as you can see that makes it a bit simpler and it reduces CPU. Up here we've got the spectral clip, and this is a handy tool for limiting loud spectral peaks in the output stage. Switch it on and you get visibility here by clicking the clipper, and as you can see it's kind of a filter effect. It just lets you cut off any nasty higher frequencies that may be sounding very harsh in a sound that you're working with. So we'll turn that off. And underneath that, we've got Safe Bass, which is a tool that ensures that there's always some energy, some oomph, if you like, a bit of kick at the fundamental frequency. So if you've got a bit of a weak sound, you can add some Safe Bass and it's going to make it sound a lot thicker. You can see there it's already adding quite a bit of thickness to what is already a bass sound. So that's a really unique tool in and of itself as part of Razor. Below that we come to the oscillator sections. So you have two oscillators, and the routing with this synth is the signal from oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 is combined, then it moves into filter 1, then it goes through filter 2 and out through the effects. So let's just take a look at each of those now. So oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, you've got your controls and setting for each type of oscillator, and simply click to avail yourself of all the oscillator types. It's as simple as that, and that's part of the genius of this GUI. You click on it and the spectrograph here changes function to show you exactly what you can pick in terms of an oscillator. So I'm not going to go into each of these because obviously that is going to be a really long and deep video, but essentially pick the waveform that you want to work with, and same here on oscillator 2, and what you'll see is that the controls, let's pick a better example, the controls change for each oscillator. So filters, same again, you click here and you can see the different types of filter that you can use. Some rather unique filters here. Again, that's part of the whole reason why this is a great unique synth. You've got formant decay, formant, vocoder, EQ decay. There's all kinds of different filters that you can use in filter 1. And again, depending on which filter you use, you'll get the controls for that filter. Filter 2 has a different set of filters. So filter 1 and filter 2 are totally different. In fact, I think there's only the low pass that is the same in both filters. Everything else is different. So what we have in this section is dissonance effects, and there's a bunch of different effects to make a sound dissonant. Again, select which one you want and the control changes automatically. Next up we have a suite of stereo effects. Again, click here to see the options. You've got auto pan, stereo spread, chorus, reverb, and some more esoteric effects like the air and unisono noise. And again, every effect has got its own set of controls. And that brings us finally to the saturation section. And as you would expect, this is where you get to affect the dynamics of the output. So you've got some compression, limiting, saturation, clipping and rectifier options there, all of which are going to affect the dynamics of the output. And obviously, again, whichever option you pick, you've got your set of controls accordingly. And that brings us to the modulation section down here below. We've got an amp envelope with an ADSR and velocity, and two envelopes, each with their own ADSR and velocity. Two LFOs with standard controls as you'd expect. You've got your speed, your wave type. You can select whether the LFO is synced to the host temp or whether you are working with Hertz. That brings us to the sidechain, which is not anything to do with compression. The sidechain is actually the result of the upper modulator, which is this one, scaling the lower modulator, which is this one. So a classic example of that would be an envelope that scales an LFO so that the LFO can be faded in and out. So select the upper modulator by clicking there, and you've got the different modulation sources. Same with the lower modulator. Now let's take a look at how you actually set the modulation up. You probably noticed these small things underneath each filter, oscillator and effect, and that's exactly where you set the modulation up for each of these. Simply click, and then you get to select the source. I'm going to work with LFO1. Sine wave, let's turn it up a bit. And you simply click and drag just like that to set the amount, the depth of the modulation. Let's set it to 0, just double click. There's the sound, and let's... So pretty self-explanatory, pretty simple to use. Obviously, if you're using different types of filters, you're going to have different controls and different modulation options. Let's play with this one briefly here. Let's go LFO 1 on the cutoff. Envelope 2, let's turn that to negative phase. This is set with the modulation wheel. I want to change that to LFO 2. And we're going to have that beat synced. So that's having quite a nice effect on it there. So it's that simple really. Just click, select the modulation source, and then click and drag to decide the depth of the modulation. That's Razor. What a fantastic synth for all kinds of sounds, as you've seen there. Basses, pads, leads, does everything and does it with style. Certainly not the kind of synth that you want to be sleeping on. If you got value from today's video, do like and subscribe. And as I said a bit earlier, if you'd like to get your hands on the couple of sounds that I've made, leave a comment below and we'll get a link in the description for you. But for now, why not watch one of these videos that YouTube is recommending? And I'll see you in the next one.